Jervis's cooperation under the security dilemma, with the understanding that three things were going to happen. Number one, I was going to lose half the class, and that was good because I wanted to get rid of as many students as possible. Number two, I was going to get maybe about 5 brainiacs that would read it and try to understand it. And then the other group would be like, I read it, I have no idea what it means. It's a long article. We're talking about, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 pages, which you can really condense into what I'm hoping is just simply a 20-minute discussion. So I took that article out. Doesn't mean that it's a bad article. It's actually one of the most important articles in IR theory. Robert Jervis is also one of the most respected scholars, along with John Mearsheimer, who we're also going to be talking about. But I thought that it's good to talk about the security dilemma a little bit today as an overarching theme to finishing up our section on realism. And as we know, realism is a very pessimistic outlook on the world. It is a theory that understands states to be self-interested and self-serving. Okay? In so many words, the international arena is anarchic. It may not be chaotic, but it's fairly obvious that under realism, it's a dog-eat-dog world. Right? Dominate or be dominated. Okay? Fight or be invaded. Okay? If you don't take care of yourself, no one else is going to do it for you. And with that in mind, there is this understanding that it is wise to err on the side of caution in diplomatic relations. Even your closest allies could at some point either turn against you because of some deus ex machina, or simply be bluffing to lead you on. The understanding is there is nothing preventing other states from weakening your own power and security. And in that understanding, we come to the belief that the world is operating in a condition of perpetual security dilemma. What do I mean by that? Security dilemma, by the very notion of dilemma, okay, implies a couple of things. First of all, the lack of any overarching international sovereign, right? The lack of a global leviathan, the lack of a world government, the lack of some country that just, won the game and, ends up taking over all the territory. Okay? The lack of that not only permits wars to occur, right, because there's no overarching oversight, but it also makes it difficult for states to be satisfied with the status quo, to keep it as such whenever an action is taken. In other words, states may actually like the status quo, especially states at the top. Certain states may be perfectly comfortable keeping things as is. But realism teaches us that nothing is permanent. So being able to dominate the region today may not mean that you're going to be in the same position to do so the next day. Because if one is at the top, realism warns us that the most dangerous countries are not the ones on the bottom, but those just below us. Okay? One never has to worry about the omega replacing the alpha. It's the beta, and maybe the gamma. So with that in mind, it is, again, for the sake of repetition, wise to err on the side of caution. With that understanding, the perceptions by state X of what state Y does is almost always going to be viewed within the lens of self-preservation and a sense of worry. Now, because every state is doing this, it's not the alpha state, but every state is doing this. Every state is looking at the actions of their neighbors with a significant degree of caution. So because states know this, anarchy, simply the lack of an international sovereign, encourages behavior. This is the paradox. Encourages behavior that leaves all concerned worse off than they could be. Even in the extreme case in which all states would collectively like to freeze the status quo. In other words, what Jervis is saying is that because every state is slightly uncomfortable with what all the other states are doing, even if everybody wants peace, stability, and the status quo. The paradox is that may not happen, simply because of perceptions, or more importantly, misperceptions. Okay? Misperceptions. We may not want a world war, but suddenly it happens. We may take necessary steps to ensure that there is an intricate alliance system that makes going to war seemingly costly and absolutely devastating. And yet, there's always that one little trigger, that one little shatter point that could cause a chain reaction leading the Germans to violate Belgian neutrality. We may not want to engage in regime change after regime change in the Middle East, but the presence of international terror, and you can go in however way that you want to argue how it came about or why it came about, but the presence of, let's say, ISIS, or more importantly, about 10 years ago, the understanding that the global arena has made it incredibly easy for rogue states to get their hands on weapons of mass destruction. Like back in the olden days, everything was, for the most part, concealed behind borders. Now suddenly, if you really want to, you can order all the ingredients for a dirty bomb on Amazon. And if you have Amazon Prime, it can all come in 2 days. Okay? The fact that that is a potential threat causes states to take necessary precautions, even if they don't want to. So the security dilemma is we don't want to be this mistrustful, but we kind of have to. Because the minute we let our guard down, we could be invaded. So in order to protect themselves, states seek to control, or at the absolute least neutralize, areas on their borders. That's all that they can do. If you follow orthodox realism, if you follow the theory to its letter, you conclude that states are only able to protect and defend their own territory, up to their borders. Here is where the problem lies. Because if a state realizes, okay, I'm going to defend my borders, I'm going to send an additional 5,000 troops to the border. Even if the neighboring state has no intention of escalating a crisis, the sight of 5,000 troops coming to what is effectively their border as well will naturally cause them to take countermeasures, if you understand what I'm saying. So attempts to establish buffer zones can alarm others, who also have stakes in the region, who fear that undesirable precedents will be set, or who believe that their own vulnerability will be increased. In response, what we end up getting is this tit-for-tat playing field, in which one side tries to out-security the other. So if state X increases its security by N, what does state Y need to do to respond in kind? N plus 1, which means that if state Y replies with N plus 1, what does state X then do? N plus 2. Okay, and so on and so on and so on. The problem is that eventually, right, tensions become so high, the minute somebody sneezes the wrong way, we have war. Okay? Now, the thing to understand about this is that a security dilemma implies a lack of trust. All right, that's the bottom line. Right? Security dilemma basically implies that there is zero trust in the international arena. And this is played out by a number of scenarios. There's 2 games that poli-sci scholars like to play. The stag hunt model, and then finally the prisoner's dilemma. The stag hunt model is a fairly simple role-playing game. Okay? So let's envision the following rules. All right, let's envision the following rules. You are all one tribal society. And for the most part, you get your food by hunting and gathering. Okay? Now here are the rules. There's 2 types of food out there that you can hunt. And let's make it a little bit more, I'll stick with the model. Even though it doesn't seem realistic, but I'll stick with the model. Okay? You can hunt rabbit, or you can hunt stag. You all know what a stag is, right? like a big male deer. Okay. Each one of you could successfully hunt a rabbit. If you choose to hunt a rabbit, you're going to get a rabbit. I mean, if you can't get a rabbit, we're going to talk about you behind your back. Okay? And the rabbit provides enough food for you for one day. Okay? You choose to hunt rabbit, you will get rabbit. You eat for a day. The other animal out there is a stag. Now, if everybody in the room cooperates together to hunt and bring down the stag, everybody eats for a week. Okay? Here are the payoffs, right? You hunt rabbit on your own, you eat for a day. You have to hunt rabbit the next day. You all agree to hunt stag, and you capture it, you all eat for a week. So that's the thing. What would you do? Knowing the payoffs, but knowing the penalties. You hunt rabbit, you eat for a day, all of yourself. Everybody agrees to hunt stag, you eat for a week. But the minute that there's one person that goes off and hunts a rabbit, nobody eats stag. Does that change your opinion? Does that change your choice?
This model is kind of confusing. Meaning by if one person deviates, no one else gets the stag.
Yep. That's the model. Just play with the model.
Okay.
Knowing that, how many people would then decide, I'm going to just hunt rabbit instead? And why is that? Because you have no control over what someone else does. You might be able to hold a rock to their head and say, hey man, give a hoot, don't hunt rabbit, or whatever it is, right? You might be able to, coerce a few people. But the problem is that given the absence of perfect information, given the absence of some kind of social contract, which we haven't gotten, we'll get to that on next Monday, err on the side of caution, especially if this is a pre-modern society. There's nothing, unless you, like on penalty of death or whatever it is, other than that, there's nothing keeping you from hunting rabbit as well. So the stag hunt model, and again, it's a very simplistic model because you could throw in a couple of other ideas to sway people's opinion. The problem is that in the absence of any kind of coercive authority, everybody is free to do what they want. Everybody is free to make their own choices. And as such, if you know in your heart of hearts, it would make so much more sense to hunt stag. It would make so much more sense if we all agreed to work on this thing. Dude, how long does it take us to work? Can we just work for 1 freaking hour and then we can all do our own thing? Then we can just eat for the rest of the week, right? The only problem is that there's nothing guaranteeing that everybody's going to be on the same page. So as such, the default is self-preservation. So the two things that we take away. Number one, unless each person thinks that the other will cooperate, he himself will not. And why is that? Because you don't want to go to bed hungry that night. If you kind of have it in your mind that the guy or the girl next to you is just simply not going to play along. How many times have you found yourself working in a group and there's one person in that group that you know for a fact is not gonna do a GD thing at all? Okay, raise your hand up high if you've already been, okay? How many times have you found yourself in a situation where, especially if the teacher decides to say, look, the grade is going to be group-oriented, so everybody gets the same grade. How many of you found yourself, maybe not doing the whole thing, but how many of you have found yourself doing more than your fair share in a group project simply because you didn't want to deal with someone else's bullshit? Right? Congratulations. There you go. Okay? So unless you know that everybody's going to put in their fair share, you've got to think about yourself. Self-preservation kicks in. Okay? Even though all the actors know that they would seek a common goal, if they work together, they may not reach it. Yes?
Does that make you weaker, say, for giving up more, or stronger, say, for being able to do that?
Good question. Does that make you weaker or stronger for putting more in than you should have? Good question. Very good question. What do you think? If you put in more than what you should, does that make you Farsighted, or does that make you the sucker? What do you think?
In realist perspective, I think it's more detrimental because because realism is about not going too far, but just going enough that you can secure yourself.
True, but if you know, then you may have to take a couple of extra measures. Do we want to send 5,000 troops to the border? We know that this might antagonize our neighbor, but better safe than sorry, or am I going to take a chance?
Better see.
See, that's the whole thing, you know? So we may or may not know that Saddam has weapons of mass destruction. And he ain't telling us, and we just don't believe a single word that Hans Blix says. So, does that make you stronger or weaker?
I think it depends. If you reach the goal, it makes you stronger, but like in the case of the Iraq War, for example, it makes us weaker.
Ah, an interesting way of answering the question. In a way, you are reaffirming one major tenet of realism. If the ends don't justify the means, then what does? So if we were like, you know what, I'm just going to play a Hail Mary pass, I'm going to invade Iraq, and we suddenly find the James Bond villain missile silo that he was hiding, George W. Bush would be seen as one of the best presidents that we ever had. But we didn't even find the instructions for the Lego playsets. Okay? They didn't even find the Allen wrench for the IKEA bookshelf that housed the manual for the weapons of mass destruction. We didn't find anything. Okay? An interesting and a rather safe question, a rather safe answer, right? If the ends don't justify the means. So it's almost like, so the answer to your question, does it make you stronger or weaker? And I really would go with that. Let's just say that it prevents a war. Then that extra step makes us more rational. Just like going that extra step in the group project. If you know if going that extra step is going to get you the A, well then good. But if going the extra step, and the teacher's like, well, you didn't put in an equal amount of work, so that's that. Well, then you wasted your time. Or you ended up destroying the country. Or you ended up getting another country to invade you. See, realism in this case is somewhat hindsight.
But doesn't that mean that other states can take advantage of it because they know you're going to go that extra mile?
Oh, absolutely so. If you give a record of being paranoid, they can totally take advantage of that. There's no question about that. Absolutely so.
So doesn't that make you
Here's the problem, though. At some point, you're going to have to play with the toys that you flex. At some point, you're going to have to do something with those missiles, Kim Jong-un. The point that I'm trying to make is that you may run the risk of antagonizing a state. But if the state, at one point, will be forced into a commitment to engage. Otherwise, they just simply are blowing hot air, and you can just simply ignore them. Okay? Now, let's play another game. Let's look then at, well, first let me just make a conclusion before we play another game. A security dilemma, therefore, this is the money shot. Okay? If you want to look for the money shot for security dilemma, here you go. A security dilemma results when a state tries to increase its security while simultaneously decreasing the security of others. Okay? A security dilemma results when a state tries to increase its security while simultaneously decreasing the security of others. So increasing your security by n forces the neighboring state to increase by n plus 1. Because if the other state does not play n plus 1, their security is simply by nature threatened. So this also reaffirms another major tenet in realism, and that is realism believes that gains in the international arena are absolute, not relative. Absolute gains, not relative gains. If I go up to Luigi and I say, hey Luigi, give me $1. And he's like, okay, if I give him $1, maybe he'll think better of me. If I don't give him $1, maybe he'll think that I'm cheap, right? His grade is riding on it. I don't care, I just want $1. So Luigi gives me $1, guess what? I have one more dollar than Luigi now has. That's an absolute gain. A relative gain would be, hey Luigi, thanks. By the way, why don't you add an extra 5 points to your midterm? All right? That would be bribery as well. Okay? That's a relative gain. An absolute gain would be like, hey, thanks for the money. Yay. Okay? That's a security dilemma. Which, if the responding state does not respond in kind, it feels that its security is therefore threatened. So, self-preservation, a lack of trust, and always thinking for one's own interest. That's what a security dilemma implies. And the next game that we show, and it's a little bit more intricate than the stag hunt, is what we know as the prisoner's dilemma. Okay, the prisoner's dilemma. How many of you have heard of the prisoner's dilemma game before? I think some of you have. Okay, very good. Who here wants to give a nice description? What do you think the prisoner's dilemma does, or what does it explain? You want to volunteer their expertise? Yes?
The prisoner's dilemma is essentially when two individuals are given the opportunity to sort of tattle on one another in order to be free from their prison. But if one doesn't, if one will decide to tell the truth, but the other does not and lies, they're both in prison or executed. Depends on which variant you're talking about.
Something similar to that. Something similar to that. Does anyone want to add to that? But it is very, the basic idea is cooperate with each other or confess to the authorities.
And it's cooperation based on imperfect information.
First of all, yes, it is cooperation based on imperfect information, because how is the game played? You have two prisoners, so where are they?
In different interrogation rooms.
They're in different interrogation rooms. Two prisoners are brought in for questioning on a lower crime, whatever smaller crime it happens to be. The DA happens to think that these two people are larger criminals, but they don't have enough evidence to indict them on a larger offense, just a smaller offense. So what do they end up doing? Well, if you've seen any cop drama, from Hill Street Blues up until now, I was even going to go with NYPD, I'm going way back, Hill Street Blues, okay? You know that they spend a good deal of their time trying to work the suspect over, right? They put them in two separate interrogation rooms, and they effectively say, what's in your best interest? And here are the stakes. If both prisoners agree to keep their mouths shut, they don't say anything, right? They lawyer up, they, whatever. But they don't say anything, the DA can't get anything out of them, okay? They're put away for jail for the lower, smaller crime. And they're both given 2 years in jail each. Okay, so if they cooperate, in this case, they cooperate with each other, not with the police, but they cooperate with each other, they get 2 years in jail each. If they confess to the larger crime, the judge can indict them on a higher offense. If they both confess, they both plead guilty, the judge gives them 5 years in jail. Okay? So if they both remain quiet, 2 years. If they both tattle, if they both confess, 5 years. Where's the 10 and 1 and 1 and 10 come in? Where do these other numbers come in?
One confesses and the other tells.
If one confesses, and one's like, okay, you got me, and the other one decides to stay quiet, the other one's like, no, man, you're never going to work me over, while the other one spills the beans. The DA doesn't care. The one who confesses is now the one who cooperates with the authorities and can actually get off on good time, and is given as a reward a 1-year prison sentence. Oh, hell, maybe even probation. The one who keeps his mouth shut, the judge doesn't care. The judge can throw the book at him now. You can plead not guilty, you can do this, you can do that. Screw you, 10 years, maximum security. Okay? And vice versa. Okay? So, if you were one of the two prisoners, what would you do? What would you do? Would you cooperate and keep your mouth shut? Or would you defect to the police and confess? What would you do? Better yet, what is the only move to play? What's the rational move? What's the logical move to play here?
To defect to the police.
You have to. Why?
Because in the self-interest, you want to look out for yourself instead of looking out for somebody else.
Okay, first of all, you confess to the belief. That is the right, this is the optimal move to play. The optimal move is to confess. Because you don't know what your partner could say or not say. And if you've watched any of these cop dramas, you know that the cops work them over in order to get the case solved in a 45-minute TV show. There's also one other, there's even more self-interested reason. Not simply because you don't know what your partner is saying, not saying. Look at the numbers. Look at the numbers. What is another incredibly self-centered reason? Yes?
If the other person tells on you, if the other person stays quiet, you get the 1 year and they get the 10 years. So your chances, if you speak up, are either 5 years or 1 year, no matter how you cut it. Whereas versus if you both stay quiet, it's 2 years or 10 years if they give up.
What you're effectively doing by confessing is you're raising your own odds. If you confess, you are guaranteed not to get the 10 years. So you're not playing for high stakes, but you're playing to avoid the sucker punch. If you confess, okay, if you basically defect, you're not getting 2. You're not getting 10. Worst case scenario, you get 5. And hey, what happens if your partner, you can eat, what's another great way of being self-centered? Self-centered means I don't know what my partner says or doesn't say. Self-centered, I don't want to get 10 years. And also self-centered, if you really want to be a jerk about this, I almost hope my partner believes in me. I almost hope my partner is like, oh man, we're going to remain quiet because fuck that, I get 1 year. Thanks, chump. Right? So in 3 moves, in 3 different scenarios, it pays to think for yourself. It pays to basically look out for your own self-interest. And as such, alliances are great when there's no threat and you're kind of just sitting there at the bar getting all emotionally drunk together. You know, I love this guy. I love this guy too, whatever. And then when you sober up, you're like, oh God, no, forget it, you know? So in that regard, you know, when things are fine, you can make alliances, you can cooperate however much that you want. Here's the thing. When threatened, when your stability is threatened, when the status quo is threatened, what takes it? What does it take for you right now to go into self-preservation mode? What does it take for you to go into self-preservation mode? Everybody's got one. Security dilemma basically says, hey, at some point, people look out for themselves. Why? Because those are the only people that can protect them. Right? So what then determines a security dilemma? How do you get to this? Well, again, playing within the realist card, the more states value their security above all other objectives. The more states value their security above all other objectives, the more likely you are to be sensitive to even minimal threats and respond with an arms increase. So the more that you are paranoid every single day about being invaded or about being challenged in whatever position that you think you're in, the more likely you will respond to anything with a security increase. The top one is full-blown realism. Classical, neo, and even neoclassical. Well, especially neoclassical. Even neorealism. The second one is one that also works in the realist camp. One that we're going to come back to in a few weeks. The more a state, and here the operative word is sees. The more a state sees another state as an adversary or a menace, the stronger and quicker it will react than if it would see a state as benign or non-threatening. Here, perception is a little bit more dynamic. But whether we're talking about universal or subjective? Trust and cooperation are two causal variables. Trust and cooperation are two causal variables. Realism does not say it is impossible to know completely what another state is doing. Realism doesn't say that. It's highly improbable, but hey, if you know pretty much that the other state has got your back, at least for this thing, have fun, cooperate. But if there's a reasonable doubt that the other country or countries have their own interests in mind, you better have yours as well. So in other words, if you know that the group that you're in is totally committed to hunting a stag, right? You've made a constitution, you spit handshake, you signed it in blood, whatever it is, okay? Go ahead. But if there's somebody in the group that's already eyeing little fuzzy hippie hops, you might want to think about doing the same thing yourself. Trust and cooperation are two key variables. And that is basically the general understanding of a security bill. Any questions before we move on to Mearshot, which isn't exactly a completely different subject. We're building on from this, but are we all good? This is relatively clear, it's relatively understandable.